My Lords, it's a pleasure to follow the Noble Lord Trees and to reinforce his expression of concern about gene drive and desire to have a direct answer from the Minister at some point on that. The term genetic engineering, the House may not know, was actually coined by a pulp science fiction writer, Jack Williamson, in a novel called Dragon's Island. And it was, as you would expect from a 1950s pulp fiction, science fiction novel, an extremely lurid and overwritten and overblown expression of concern. But the kind of concerns that arise from gene drives do fit within that framework. However, to come back to the particular framework of this bill, your Lordship's House is used to now bills coming before us, either from the Commons or direct from the government, in a dreadful state. But the schools bill was at least about schools. The procurement bill was at least about, you guessed it, however poorly drafted it may have been, has the government acknowledged. However, with this genetic technology brackets precision breeding close brackets bill, we have actually hit a new low. Experts from across the field, including many in favour of widespread rollout of gene editing, say that the term precision breeding has no technical or legal meaning. The phrase is a sales slogan, not a definition, which makes the fact that the bill has been allowed to be tabled as such extremely surprising. And I think the noble Lady Baroness Jones of Whitchurch set out many other expressions of practical concern from the Regulatory Policy Committee, which I won't repeat, but the red flags really are flying here. But coming back to that word precision, and I'm echoing here and building on comments from the noble Lord Winston, how DNA works is far from precise, and the tools that we use to manipulate it interact with highly variable genetic material in unpredictable ways. I'll venture here into a little of the depths of the science, because it's crucial that we do. And as with so many other issues within science, understanding is changing fast. Science often revises itself in deeply fundamental ways, and that's something that I'm afraid to say I really do not believe your Lordship's House as a whole has truly grasped. And there are few people, many of them are here today in this chamber, in politics with a scientific background. And some who do acquired it many decades ago, and those understandings have moved on and sometimes reversed. So the fact is, as the noble Lord Winston outlined, genes do not operate in a deterministic way about how an organism develops or operates. Living beings are complex, ever-changing. They are not machines built to a blueprint. Picking up some of those technical points, copy number variation, the number of instances of a gene can result in widely varying effects. There are epigenetic changes. Under different circumstances, environmental circumstances, the code of the genes can be read very differently. Even the location of the same gene in a different place actually can result in widely different differences, rightly different outcomes. And what I was taught in a science degree 30 years ago was junk DNA, about 99% of the total, is now titled non-coding DNA. And we know, as we knew then, that it doesn't produce proteins, but it can and does have widely varying impacts on the DNA that does produce proteins. And I pick up here the point from the noble Lord Krebs talking about exogenous DNA and saying, I paraphrase a little, but we don't really have to worry about that. But if we think about the way in which we know this junk DNA can have unknown and variable effects, then it's something that we really need to think about. Although I do have to thank the noble Lord Krebs for putting tardigrades into Hansard, I think for the second time since the first time was in my maiden speech. There's increased scientific understanding about how genetics and environment interact. It's neatly, if somewhat cryptically, summed up in the phrase, genotype does not determine phenotype. Plants and animals are products of complex, sophisticated, ever-changing interactions between their genes, the microbiome that in effect makes every complex organism in an individual ecosystem, including every member of your Lordship's house, the chemical and physical framework around them, and even indeed pure chance. And I'd point Noble Lords to a fascinating article in New Scientist on the 21st of September about how the way your brain developed, having a large element of chance, which is some very fascinating new research. Now, the tools being used for gene editing are not nearly as precise as has been claimed, and there's a practical reality about how these studies are carried out, that they often fail to check beyond the intended outcomes. They see if they produced what they wanted, but they don't see what else they've produced. To quote one careful academic analysis from this year, quote, "Very few studies have used unbiased methods and a systematic approach to detect genome-wide off-target mutations," close quote. That, of course, is where we look at the driving force, the commercial interests behind so much of this research. People are very often not paid to find the results that they didn't want. Now, I would point Noble Lords to an excellent briefing that covers these issues in far more detail than I have time to today, from the Alliance for Food Purity, and they've done a great deal of very detailed technical work in that briefing. But the underlying problem is that the bill is applying the language of engineering to biology, and they are not compatible. And the outputs, the food that we might all eat without knowing it, if the bill is allowed through in its current form, could see the appearance of unexpected allergens or even toxins. Farmers could, with the bill in its current form, see genetically edited seeds planted in their neighbours' fields and changing the genetics of theirs without their being informed. And that, of course, is a particularly huge issue for organic farmers. And that, of course, is an issue that plays out too on a national scale. Both the Scottish and Welsh governments have indicated they do not want gene-edited crops, but there's no way of stopping the seeds or their genes at these borders. And that too is an issue that extends beyond these islands. The bill is likely to be in breach of the Cartagena Protocol on Biosafety, an international agreement that aims to protect biodiversity from the impact of genetic engineering. Now, the list of the problems with this bill, a familiar set, goes on. There are Henry VIII clauses by the step, allowing changes by ministerial diktat at virtually every key point. Just to pick out one, Clause 1, brackets 8, allows the Secretary of State to widen the definition of a precision-bred organism through regulations, the absolutely crucial key part of this bill. And again, the noble lady Baroness Jones of Whitchurch set out the issues around labelling and how, again, this could be changed by regulation. Now, many noble lords have already covered the issue about whether animals should be excluded from the scope of the bill. And I think this is an issue that's been very widely covered, but the question is, and I think the noble lord the minister in a debate a couple of weeks ago we had on avian flu almost made a concession of a point of acknowledging that we have huge problems with pests and diseases in our animal factory farmed populations because we have enormous factory farms populations, and that this is something which inevitably allows one disease to flourish, and if you tackle that one disease while leaving the system in place, another disease will arrive in short order. Now, I've come sort of to my final point, or my final groups of points, and this is various noble lords have made implicit or explicit references to food security. And if we bet our approach, we take our standard approach as being through gene editing, we're aiming for a silver bullet type approach, continuing as we are now, but looking to just find those magic solutions. But we know what we need to do to feed the world, to use the phrase. And in fact, we have on occasions heard from the government benches opposite an acknowledgement of this fact. What we need are agroecological approaches that work with the sophisticated complexity of nature which we're just beginning to grasp, to truly cultivate the systems that have developed over hundreds of millennia, rather than to take to them like a toddler trying to put together a clock that is disassembled with a hammer. Now, the Minister, the Noble Lord the Minister, in his introduction to this bill, said that science must be at the heart of our national recovery. And that is a statement I absolutely agree with. The 21st century sciences of ecology, of systems thinking, the sciences that understand that these complex ecosystems cannot be managed like a machine, that is the science that we desperately need to feed ourselves and look after our natural world. The Noble Lord Krebs said the Green Revolution was a miracle that came at a cost. I think we're starting to see, and we're coming up to the COP15 biodiversity talk soon, that cost has been enormous and unaffordable, and we cannot afford to repeat the same set of mistakes that we made in the 1960s today. And finally, I'm going to pick up the Jonathan Swift quote that the Noble Lord Krebs used. And again, I will give the Noble Lord credit for making a gender update to the quote. But I'm going to make a speciesist update to the quote. The quote, Noble Lords will recall, was it talked about growing 2 ears of corn or 2 braids of grass where previously there had been 1. Well, the fact is, of course, if you want those extra blades of grass or those extra pieces of corn, what you actually need is a healthy soil. You need a rich ecosystem of fungi and bacteria working cooperatively with the plant, and you'll get a lot more than 2 extra ears of corn. You will get both healthy, rich food and a healthy environment and security for all of us.